There's a lot of interesting things that have been happening lately, and I'd like to talk about them, but especially in the context of this question. Why is it, when you look at the Geula, the redemption, why does it seem to go so slow? It looks like it goes forward and then backwards, forwards and then backwards. It seems to creep along very, very slowly. So I thought that was important to understand, which I really want to explain, and some of the what's called the biblical or historical antecedents of this in terms of what is happening, especially in terms of a messianic process. And that's really what the Shir is all about. The Geula, redemption, always happens very slow. So the first thing you have to understand is because it depends what's the principle behind the redemption. If the redemption would happen miraculously, then it would happen much quicker. But if it's going to happen what's called ayidei teva, naturally, which is what's happening, then it goes much slower. So that's a fundamental difference between the two methodologies. And what we're experiencing is that the redemption itself, which is basically in progress, is happening, but it happens very slowly. And the question is, what's the logic of that? Of why? Whether the Geula or the redemption happens naturally depends on how the Jews bring about the rectification of the Bria, of the creation. If the Jews bring about the rectification of the Bria, the universe, creation, then the Geula happens what's called through, it happens through miracle. If the Geula comes about as a result of mitzvahs, which means that the Jews did a tremendous amount of mitzvahs, then the redemption itself will happen basically miraculously. And as a result of that, of course, it will go much quicker. However, if the Jews basically bring the redemption through suffering, then what happens is the redemption happens much slower, and it happens in a natural way, or at least it appears to be natural. Of course, we know that nothing is natural, but like I say, but it appears to be natural. We just passed Hanukkah, and it appears that the Jews won the victory over the Greeks in a natural way. Of course, when you analyze it, you say to yourself, well, it's impossible. Because how can 10,000 Jews overcome an army of over 125,000 battle-hardened Greek soldiers who were formerly from the army of Alexander, who had conquered the entire world? Yet, there were no miracles in that sense, so it seems to have happened naturally. So therefore, what we're looking at is a redemption that happens in a natural way. Okay, so that's an important idea. Now, if you take a look at there seem to be three basic arenas in terms of what's happening, in terms of the messianic advancement. The first battle is the battle in America itself. Now, we know who Donald Trump is, which I have mentioned so many times, that he's what's called the Tov Shebe'esav, the good part of Esav, okay, who has come back to realize, to actualize the whole concept of that Rav Yavoi Tzoir, that the older will serve the younger. And that's really what's happening. And of course, he's doing an incredible job, which it's amazing that in the beginning when he ran, people felt he was an anti-Semite. And I said, excuse me, people out of your mind? He's going to be the greatest president in the history of Israel. And he, of course, he's doing even more stuff that we even imagined that he would do, So that's clearly consistent with that idea that he's really the Tov Shebe'esav, the good part of Esav. And he is battling the establishment, whoever you want to call them. You can call them the liberals, you can call them the Democrats, you know. You can call them the progressives, whatever. These people, the establishment, these are the Rosh Beisav. And there's an incredible battle going on. Because what Trump is doing, obviously, is he is incredibly advancing the process, a messianic process, and he's enabling Israel to get back their land. As we know, Esav in the Torah says, Yehilu Chasheloch, that which is yours be yours, and he is consistently doing that with everything he's done so far. So that's the first battle that we're watching. Now, interesting, and that battle only takes place at the end. What is interesting is that, as we see so far, that battle has been going on, as Trump himself said. I think it was 19 minutes after he won the presidency, they declared that they're going to impeach him. I mean, it's just astounding. He wrote a letter to the Congress. It's a beautiful letter, you know, and he writes these things, you know, that that's all they think about is impeachment, because obviously they have nobody to rival him, and they have nobody with any normal policies. So the only thing they can do to the guy is smear him by impeaching him. But of course it's not going to work. In any case, that's the first fascinating scene that is going on in terms of America, which is really Esav. Okay. Now we know, of course, that his job, Trump's job, as I had mentioned any time, is to assist Israel in terms of their tikkun by giving them back and allowing them to develop in so many different ways. The second job of Trump is to defend the Jews against the enemies of the Jewish people, whether it be the UN, whether it be Europe, whether it be Iran, which he's doing an incredible job, especially in terms of the news today and so on. You know, but that's what he's also doing. He's also making America great, and the primary reason of that is, of course, the greater America becomes, then their credibility becomes greater. So when Trump, of course, goes out of his way to do things for the Jewish people, then everybody wants to get behind America. They want to become friends with America, and of course, that's what they want to do. In any case, we also watch, interesting, that the Democrats seem to be destroying themselves. And this is all hashgacha pratis. What is amazing is that we would imagine that the House, which is a larger-than-life body, would have enough seichel, enough intelligence to realize that what they're doing is so blatantly obvious to everybody that it's a vendetta against Trump. There's no justice involved. It's obviously the whole thing is complete violation of due process and so on. But it doesn't seem to bother them, or they don't seem to really aware of it. But the main idea, of course, I believe, is that they will suffer terribly at the polls as a result of that. In any case, so that's the first area. Second area is Iran. Now, Iran is suffering in two different ways, which is interesting. We know that there's a medrash with Iran, the medrash of the Yalkut. And what it says there is that in the end of time, actually the language of the medrash is that in the week that Ben David Bo, doesn't mean literally the week, it could mean the 7-year cycle of Shemitah. But in any case, in that time, it says that Poras, which is Iran, will war with Arabia, and Arabia will then consult with Edom, which is America, and they are going to try to destroy the world. And the world will be incredibly anxious, of course, and what will happen then is a baskol, a divine voice will come out and say, Higi azman gulaschem, the time of your redemption has arrived. And we see therefore that the attempt of Iran to dominate the world will be the last war that Israel has to face, without going into Gog and Magog. But that's basically the end. And we see that Iran is collapsing. And of course, due to Trump, the economy is collapsing. You know, they're probably holding very close to bankruptcy. And the second thing is they are now, because of their incredibly absurd policies of giving money to everybody else but their own people, there's enormous amount of demonstrations all around Iran. That's very dangerous for the mullahs, because once that climate of rebellion takes hold, then you never know, they may overthrow all the clerics, all the mullahs. So we have demonstrations all over Iran. But what's happening also, 2 days ago actually, is an incredible event where this guy Soleimani, I should say, the major guy, one of the major heads of Iranian, the military, the Republican Guard and so on, has been assassinated by Trump. That's an amazing concept, because we now witness Trump going to war. That's really what it is. When you assassinate the head of the army, that's war. He's now going to war with Iran. And as a result of that, that has been a severe setback to Iran. And this is a major advancement forward in the beginning of the end of Iran. What is interesting is that just like the Ribono Shel Olam has taken out all the Arab nations, many of them, without Israel having in any way to be involved in that conflict, God is sparing Israel the necessity of having to go to war with these people. God is taking them out himself. We see that the Arab Spring, in terms of all the Arab countries, Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, which is now falling apart. Then you have, of course, Libya and Egypt, and all just really collapsing and so on. What the Ribono Shel Olam seems to be doing is taking out Iran. Same idea, without Israel having to be involved at all. So it actually seems to be happening. You see. So this is a very important movement forward, that Iran is really on its last legs. Iran has a very big problem because they can't start up with America. Because if America wanted, they could take out Iran in 3 days, 4 days. So what can they really do? If they kill Americans, they know that Trump is unlike any other president. He will destroy them. That's what Trump will do. He will not tolerate that type of behavior against American lives. And they know that. So in order to they have to save face, or they look terrible in front of the entire world. Their major guy, general, was assassinated by America. And I also just heard that America told the American army in Iraq to go on the offensive, to kill the Iranian soldiers that are in Iraq. America wants to remove them from Iraq, which is really, when you think about it, it's an act of war against Iran. So it's not just Soleimani, but it's now a war against all military soldiers, advisors, or whatever, personnel in Iraq. America wants to throw them out of Iraq. So hopefully Iran will respond by doing something really dumb, and really do something that Trump will take a tremendous offensive against them, and that, incredibly so, will remove Iran from the terrorist brotherhood. That's really, when you think about it, that's incredible. Could you imagine a world without Iran? It'd be incredible. That means the real sponsor of terrorism would be destroyed. So imagine the Hezbollah would be destroyed because there's no money, right? So you have Hezbollah being destroyed, then you have Hamas, and you have many other allegiances to Iran. They can't operate without Iran sponsoring them. It would be ushering a tremendous period of peace in the world, which is exactly what has to happen before a Messianic era. Now, a third area, which is fascinating, is Israel. They have failed to put together a coalition twice, which is historical, never happened before. Netanyahu, who was a prime minister, has been indicted, and that's the first time a sitting prime minister has been indicted. And therefore, what we're really seeing is the fall of the Erev Rav. That's really what's happening, and that itself is a very important stage, Because in order to really return the Jews to Torah and mitzvahs and so on, then you need to get rid of the Erev Rav. And like I said many times, as long as Netanyahu is prime minister, the Jews in Israel will never do tshuva. And that's therefore it's very important that the whole government be removed, and that's happening and so on. But it happens in stages, you see, and I'm going to talk about that. So therefore we see in 3 different areas, each one pivotal to a messianic process. They're all happening. So that gives a person tremendous hope, you see, that it's actually happening, and it's all happening simultaneously, you see. Now, I had mentioned a long time ago that there is a Zohar. It's a Raya Mehemna. It's a Zohar that says the following, that just like in Egypt, they were there 210 years or whatever, therefore, before the end of time, which is the English year 2240, or the year 6000, 210 years before that, you will have the entry of Mashiach ben David. And therefore you will have Tchias HaMesim, which is resurrection of the dead. Now if you subtract 210 from 2240, that is equal to 2030, which is 10 years from now. It just became now January 4th, 2020. It's only 10 years left. That's the reason why you're seeing such an enormous acceleration. You actually have, it's like 3 different areas in the world which are tremendously connected to the messianic process. And you're seeing them, you're seeing them all together, and they all seem to be converging. So, therefore, this year should be shape up to be an incredible year for an advancement of the messianic process, you see. But what is the process itself? The Chazal described the messianic process, or right before that, as Chevli Mashiach, which is the birth pangs of the Mashiach. Well, what does that mean? It means that if you know, when a woman is about to give birth, you have a child or an infant, an embryo, whatever you want to call it, in the uterus and so on, and it enjoys a whole different world. And when the child is born, it enters a completely different scenario, which is called, of course, outside. And of course, to the child, it must be a shock that this happens. In many ways, that's exactly you can compare it to. That's really the model. We live in a world that has tremendous amount of hester, tremendous amount of concealment of the divine presence, tremendous amount of concealment of spirituality. And in the Messianic era, it is 1,000 times more than we have now. In fact, it's almost incomprehensible, which I've spoken about in the past and so on. So that is akin to, a child being born from inside the uterus or womb and coming out and seeing a whole different existence. The same idea. We are now as if we are in a fog, as if we are in the womb, and the emergence of that would be the Messianic era. So therefore, there's a concept called Chevli Mashiach. It's birth pangs. It takes time for the infant to emerge and come out into a different world. The same thing. And that happens in stages. The same thing that happens now is that this messianic process happens in stages. And this is a very important idea. Do not expect it to go from beginning to end, in 1 week. Not at all. It does take a long time, The critical thing, of course, is that there are stages, and there are stages, therefore, of the redemption itself. What I would say is, if you want to compare it, you could say that it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back. This is the way it proceeds. So there's always forward and a back motion. And that's really what we're seeing. Okay, and I will explain. But anyway, this is how the Chevli Mashiach acts. 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Where do we see this? Now, what I want to explain is, why does that have to be that way? Why does the messianic process have to proceed slowly, where it actually goes back to a certain extent and then moves forward? So for that, there's certain ideas which you have to become familiar with, which I'm sure in many ways everybody is. Life is very challenging. What does that mean? Life is a game of survival. You want to survive, you have to fulfill your needs, okay, and you have to satisfy your needs, and then you also want not just survive, but you also want to prosper. And therefore, every human being looks for stability and predictability. Every human wants to have an environment that is stable and predictable, where it knows that within this type of environment, right, it can meet its needs and survive. That's human nature, which is interesting, okay? And what a person can do is that no matter what the environment is, he can accommodate it. He's flexible enough to, even within that environment, even if that environment is very difficult, he can survive and certainly try to flourish. That's what a person is always trying to do. Now, what's interesting is that, therefore, any type of change, okay, produces anxiety. Why? Because a person must have some type of stability. Therefore, change produces anxiety, because a person doesn't know if the next environment after the change, he will be able to survive. He will be able to prosper and flourish. And therefore, any kind of change in a person's life is anxiety provoking. You know, what's interesting is the greatest change of all is redemption, is geula. As a result of that, we can expect that people are going to become very anxious, actually even in a redemption. Because nobody knows what will be after the redemption. Nobody really knows. So the redemption itself, which everybody to a certain extent looks forward to, is probably the greatest anxiety producer. And as a result of that, it will actually welcome all kinds of resistance. That's what happens when the geula is imminent. People don't know what to do. You see, it's an interesting concept. But human nature must have stability and predictability. You see, even people would rather see the continuity of an evil regime, right, than a change to something else that they don't know will happen. Because at least with the evil regime, they have sort of like navigated their way, they have played around with the system so they can manipulate it. You see? Because they've accommodated themselves to it. But in a situation which is absolutely different, everybody gets nervous because they don't know what the future holds. And like I said, this is even true of the geula, the redemption. Where do you see that? It's interesting to watch. You see it in Egypt, Mitzrayim. There's a famous chazal where it says, where the Torah says, when they left Egypt, chamushim olum Mitzrayim. Right? Chamushim is armed. But Rashi says that really means 1/5. Rashi says, and it's based on a medrash, that 80% of the Jewish people died in Egypt in the plague, the makkah of choshech, darkness. So the Egyptians shouldn't see that the Jews die, and therefore they would never let the Jews out. You see. And the question is, why? Why would so many people die? And therefore, what is interesting is that what did these people do or want? These 80% that died. What they wanted is interesting. They said, listen, the main concept of redemption is to be free men, not to be slaves. And God has accomplished that for us. You know, we will never be slaves in Egypt because the Egyptians are frightened of the Jews. So then why can't we remain in Egypt? We're free men, right? We can do what we want. We can pursue whatever desires we have, religiosity. You know, it's not that they wanted to deny God. On the contrary, let's be religious, but we want to do it in Egypt. You see, that's what they wanted. God, of course, said no. It's not enough to be free men in Egypt. That's not what the purpose is. You must be an independent nation altogether, dedicated to serving me. You see. But that's what the Jews in Egypt thought. You see, or at least 80% thought that, and so on. Not that they want to deny a life without a God and so on. No, on the contrary. But they want to remain in Egypt. Why? See, and the answer is because Egypt was stable and predictable. They were there for hundreds of years. They knew exactly how to negotiate, right? How to navigate the system, as they say, in Egypt, right? And they were comfortable with it. So they said, listen, the main thing is we want to become free. We don't want to be slaves anymore. You see, that's what they said. So we know the system, we can navigate it, we can prosper and survive. That's it. We want to stay here. But the amazing thing is that this, we are talking about the redemption itself. You see, this is the redemption, the Geula. They witnessed how many? Because it happened in Choshech that they died. That means they witnessed 8 Makkahs before that. And they saw clearly the power of God. You see? So we're talking about the Geula itself. Yet they still resisted the redemption. To the extent where God said, okay, you don't want to leave Egypt, right? Then you will not survive Egypt. And of course God took them, but later on he brings them back in Gilgulim, which is reincarnations and so on. So it's not like they disappeared. They just never made it in Egypt and so on, you know. But the incredible thing is that they resisted even the redemption, the Geula itself. Wow. What a fear, you know. And, you know, we would imagine that when they were in the midst of the redemption, the Geula itself, right? You could imagine that they said, this is fabulous, you know. But that's how strong the desire is of a person to maintain the status quo. They want to remain in the same place because that is stability, that is predictability. That's how I can survive. You put me in some new place, I don't know what's going to be. You see? Now what's interesting, what do you mean what's going to be? You know, can it be bad? God is destroying Egypt. You see? But what's interesting is that in a certain sense, they said, wait a minute, you know, it's true he's destroying Egypt, but guess what? Paro is still defying the word of God. He is still defying Moshe Rabbeinu. You see? So we don't know, even if there's a redemption, you know, we don't know what Paro is going to do. They didn't see Makkah's Bechuras yet because they died in the plague before Makkah's Bechuras, the killing of the firstborn. They died in the plague of Choshech, darkness. So they didn't see this, you see. So what they did see is that no matter what, how many plagues he bring against Egypt, Paro, he doesn't want to let them out. And so that gives them what's called a chalisha, a tremendous weakening of emunah in the Rebbeinu Shalom. And they didn't know about what was going to happen with Makkah's Bechuras, with the killing of the firstborn, and so on. You see. So because they had that vulnerability, that weakness where they saw Paro was defying God, therefore in a certain sense, right, the need for stability and predictability kicked in. You see. Because they said, look, we don't know what's going to be. And the interesting thing is that even if what? Paro takes us out, right? Where are we going to go? That means over 2.5 million people are going to go into a wilderness, right? How in the world is God going to support 2.5 million people? You can't grow anything there, you see? So that becomes a major test of emunah, of faith in God, and bitochen. That was yet to come, because they knew that God wanted them out of Egypt, right? So this test was yet to come, so they said to themselves, can God pull this off? You see? In some sense there was a doubt, because if Paro can still defy God, you know, so there's a problem here, you see. So can God pull it off where he can support 2.5 million people, Jews, in a desert where there's no food, there's no housing, there's nothing there? See, all of this came together with a Jewish refusal, we don't want to leave. That's how strong it was. So the Rebbe said, you know, because you don't want to you don't want to rely on me, that I can keep all of you alive and bring you through a desert, you know, and therefore none of you will ever see it. In a certain sense, it was a midah keneged midah. But the upshot of all this is what? Is that they actually resisted the geula itself. It's a very important lesson. That's how important it is for a person to maintain, as I said, a tremendous stability and a predictability. You see, no. Because remember, when you see change, you get worried, you get anxious, for several reasons. First of all, by a redemption. First of all, how do I know evil will be destroyed? Number one. Number two, how do I know that evil will be destroyed totally? Number three, how do I know evil will be destroyed permanently? Maybe they'll come back. They always seem to come back, Number four, even if good replaces evil, how do I know it will be really all good? How do I know it will be permanent? You see, all these weigh on a person's mind, even though he's witnessing or in the middle of a redemption process. So we see that in the Torah itself, we had the incident where the Jews died. You see? Now, besides that difficulty, this is one of the reasons why geula has to go slow. Why? Because if you rush it, if you change the world too quick, people will resist the geula. They will resist the redemption itself, which is exactly what happened. But in Egypt it was worse, because 80% resisted it. What was left? 20%? Do you imagine only 20% of the Jews went out of Egypt and received the Torah? 80% died. That is such an enormous amount of people that didn't want to leave Egypt. You see, and that was because it was happening so quick. You see, one makkah after the other, even though from the beginning to the end, it did take quite a while, a year. But what's a year to go from slaves in Egypt to completely free and living on miracles all day long in a desert, in a wilderness? You see. So therefore, what the Rosh must do, since we know that the redemption will happen through teva, natural means, okay, and not miraculous, is he has to go slow. So people can get used to the idea, right? Oh, evil is falling, all of evil is falling, and it's going to be permanent. You see? So people get used to the idea, and as time goes on, they can adjust. And then all of a sudden good enters, and it really seems to be great, and it seems to be permanent. That's one of the reasons why the geula takes time. Because since it's happening naturally, you cannot frighten people, because people will get frightened, because everybody seeks some type of stability and predictability. This is human nature. And that's one of the reasons why the geula can take several years. And as time goes on, people will see that it's really working. It's a very important idea, you see, because you do not want to frighten the people. So it has to take time, you see. Okay. Now, another reason, yeah.
Were people given the plan in Mitzrayim?
No.
Well, maybe...
You mean Makas Bechoros?
For Makas Bechoros. My question is, if people know, how strong is that has that insistence on the status quo, if people know the game plan?
They don't know the game plan. In fact, there's an interesting Orach Chaim.
Even when the geula is already here, meaning the geula is here, let's say the Gedolim say this is the geula, then already there's kind of a switch like, oh, this is the geula, this is so.
People won't believe it. We are in Golus for thousands of years, you know. Just because Gedolim say there's a geula, you know how many times Gedolim predicted the case?
That's predicted. They say this guy is Mashiach ben Yosef.
No, but that destroys their credibility. What's the difference if they say it or this guy is it? People have to see it. That's why there's an interesting Rambam. The Rambam says, how will we know who the Mashiach is? You know, how will we know? You know, it was an incredible thing that the Jews accepted Moshe Rabbeinu's word. Okay, he used the right terminology, Poker Yivkoid, whatever, But the interesting thing is that why did they believe altogether that he was the Mashiach? After so many hundreds of years. Imagine Mashiach is in America and he says, okay, everybody, let's pack up, right? Let's go to Eretz Yisrael, right? You know what everybody's going to tell him? Excuse me, where'd you come from? You know what I'm saying? How do we know you're Mashiach? So the Rambam says, the only way we know the person is the real Mashiach is the man never fails. Never. Like Yosef, everything that Moshe did, God made successful. You see, that's how you know, because he never fails. You see, now that type of a guy has credibility. You see, and everybody's waiting for him to fail. You see, because deep down, most people don't want the redemption. They're already ensconced in their real estate, in their bank accounts. They have a good life, 2 cars, or whatever it is, It's like the famous, it's really a joke, where 2 people, a man and his wife, were talking, and the husband said to his wife, he said, we got big problems. What's the problem, he asked? Well, we own real estate, we have a big bank account, we have a great job, I have 3 factories, and so on. What's the problem then? Problem is if the Mashiach comes, right, we have to leave it and go to Eretz Yisrael. That's what he said to her. So she said, why are you worried? What do you mean why I'm worried? Because that's what's going to happen. So she said to him, don't worry. God saved us from Haman. He saved us from Parai. He's going to save us from the Mashiach. That is the attitude. Of course, somebody who has a lot of problems, of course, he'll be glad. But many people don't want that because they don't want that type of change. So in order to do this, God has to do it slow and get people used to it, you see. And therefore, it proceeds very slowly. It takes time.
So essentially what Hashem is doing is he's preparing for the fact that certain people, he wants as many people as possible with Mashiach, and yet he doesn't want people to kind of ruin it, even though they were Zocha, but they're kind of ruin it by that last minute fear.
Yeah, he doesn't want
this. He says, okay, so let me read them slowly. As many people as possible.
And you'll see it actually works. That he's actually successful. Whatever he does must succeed. You see, because when the Mashiach comes, there is no such thing as Chevle Mashiach. He's here, it works. There's no longer stages of the redemption. There are certain stages in that sense, but there's no 2 steps forward and 1 step back. It's all forward. Once that time arrives, it's all forward.
What's the cost of 1 step back again?
What was that?
What was the cost?
Well, I'm going to go into that.
Okay.
Why there is a step back. But this is all before he comes. In any case, now, let's examine why is it that there is this 2 steps forward and 1 step back while the process is ongoing. So one idea, I already said one idea, is that it can't take place too fast, or it's going to be a tremendous amount of resistance, because people are just frightened by that type of radical change in such a short amount of time. But the other idea is that because the Satan is going to say, wait a minute, you can't bring the Gula because there's still claims against the Jewish people. They still have sins that they have to atone for, So how do you do that? So therefore, the Rosh says, I'm going to bring the redemption, but in order to satisfy justice, din, right, which is what the Satan is claiming, right, I'm going to have to go back at certain times, you see, and undo certain things or put certain obstacles in the path. Because the din says, why should there be a Gula? You see, so that's our idea also. It's because the Rosh must satisfy the din, ultimately. So if there's a din, a claim against the Jews, that, in a certain sense, offers resistance and stops the forward motion. In fact, we see also by Avram Avinu, even though God promised him Eretz Yisrael, it says, Kanani Oz Ba'oretz, right? Why does it say that? Because as this will be the next reason, because the evil has to have its due. You can't just wrench evil out and destroy it. it has to have used up all its merits, and then you could destroy it. And we see that even though Avraham Avinu was promised Eretz Israel, he couldn't take it over. Why? Because the Canaanites still had merits, whatever they were, in order to hold on to Eretz Israel. You see? So that's a very important concept, that evil has to have its due based on its merits. And only when they will have used up all the merits, then you could annihilate them. And then, of course, the Geula can proceed totally. So we have, the Jews have to atone, and God wants to satisfy the judgment, and therefore all of a sudden there's a backward motion. We have the concept that evil has to have its due based on its merit, you see. Also, as a requirement which I had mentioned a while back, if God is going to bring the redemption through because the Jews have suffered and so on, then what he's going to do, as I mentioned a couple of shurim ago, he's going to bring a tremendous rise in evil. So when he now declares Einod Mavadoi, it's going to be against an enemy which is so incredibly strong, and that itself will magnify the greatness and the strength of God. I had mentioned that a while back. That's the concept of Tigbur Surah, the proliferation of evil at the end of time. See, because since God is now going to show who he is, then the greater the enemy, then that is the greatest demonstration of the awesome power of God. So that also takes time at the end of time. You see, there's also another reason, and that is that, like in Egypt, even though Paroi was saying no to Moshe, one after another, there is a concept called bitochen, that if the Jews had to have, once they see the operation of these nisim, they have to have trust in God, that he's not doing this for naught, that as a result of all this, they will be redeemed. And that trust, in many ways, God needs to push it forward totally. You see it by Nachshon ben Aminadav, when the Red Sea, all of a sudden, they're up against the Red Sea, the Egyptians are on the other side. There was a tremendous army, the greatest chariots, 600 chariots or whatever and so on, And all of a sudden they have the Red Sea, the sea in front of them. What do? You see? So Moshe Rabbeinu said, God said to Moshe, don't worry about it, just move into the sea, which was astounding, It's like, how in the world can that possibly be? And nobody was moving. And finally, Nachshon ben Aminadav, he jumped into the sea. And that display of tremendous bitochen, trusting God, you see, that is what, that merit allowed the sea to split. For whatever reason that the Moshe needed that merit, that bitochen that Nachshon had, maybe encouraged others and so on, and that merit is what enabled the sea to split. So that's a very important idea. What we see therefore is that redemption happens in stages. It doesn't go 1, 2, 3. Where we really see this? Imagine the Rebbe Hashem talks to Moshe Rabbeinu by the burning bush, the sneh, and he says, you're the Mashiach. I designate you the one to take them out. Great. What does Moshe do? Fine, he goes to Egypt, and he does the miracle of the snake and the staff and so on, And Pharaoh tells him basically, get lost. Not only get lost, but the Jews are lazy, you see? So what I'm going to do is make all the Jews gather their own straw to make the bricks. So it comes out an amazing thing, that after the Mashiach came to Egypt, it got worse. Now I ask you, how disheartening is that? It was terrible. In fact, it was so terrible that Moshe Rabbeinu went back to God and he said, I don't understand. Where's the Geula? And if you don't intend to do the Geula, what are you asking me to take him out? Even he did not understand, you see, what was going on. And the Moshe had tremendous tinus, claims against Moshe and so on. But what do we see? That the first stage is the sneh, is the burning bush. The second stage is the reversal of the first. When Moshe Rabbeinu is not the Mashiach, not only that, Paro tells him to get lost, not only that, Paro makes it much worse for the Jews. You see? So what do we see? That after the Messianic process starts, it goes in reverse. You see? That's what we see. That's clearly. And not only that, every single makkah, ultimately Paro said, no. Wait a minute, Moshe Rabbeinu says, wait, I'm the Mashiach, and the Rebbe Hashem said, right, that the Jews are going to leave Egypt. He told me that at the sneh. Yet every single makkah, Paro says, no. So that's another obstacle. Every makkah was accompanied initially by, after the makkah, no. So each one of these things, what? The Jews were incredibly disappointed and dismayed. Could you imagine what kind of test that is? When you have somebody who is the Mashiach and who is acting like the Mashiach and is successful as the Mashiach because he's bringing all these miracles, blood, frogs, and so on, yet Paro defies God. So we're not talking about somebody who says he's the Mashiach. He's demonstrating he's the Messiah. Mama's demonstrating it. Yet nothing works. Could you imagine how the Jews felt every time Paro said no? Right? It's another failure. And not only that, what really worked is in the end, when they finally destroyed so much of Egypt, they're by the Red Sea, and all of a sudden they see a resurgence of evil coming to get them by Kriyas Yam Suf, by the Red Sea. Can you imagine where they say to themselves, I don't stand this. What are we doing here? You know what I'm saying? You can't seem to get rid of the Egyptians. It's like crazy glue. You can't get it off your hand. You know what I'm saying? I think that's what it is. Anyway, So the question is, how do we understand this? So what do you see from this? Do not think that the Messianic process will go smoothly and rapidly. It doesn't, for the reasons that I mentioned, and so on. There will be what's called fits and starts, rather starts and fits, whatever it works and so on, Again, because there are reasons for this. People have to, like I said, the reason that I mentioned, why these things, it moves forward 2 steps, it goes back 1 step, and so on, and this is with Moshe Rabbeinu, who is the Mashiach, and he demonstrated it over and over again. Yet it still doesn't go forward smoothly. You see, this is what happens. So in today's time, what are we watching, right? We are watching the same thing. It goes forward, right? Trump is elected, which is unbelievable. You see, and what he's done for the Jewish people is beyond, it's just beyond credibility. It's just incredible, and so on, which we all know. The embassy move, and Israel now has Jerusalem as the capital, and now the Golan is good, and the whole territories are good, and so on. And he's killing BDS. What he's doing is just incredible. One would think that he's Jewish. Because he's literally doing for the Jews what nobody has ever done before in terms of the American presidents. But there's an obstacle. Who's the obstacle? The House. All of a sudden, they win the House. And guess what? They are after him. You see, that's the obstacle. That's the 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But at least we know one thing. It still has to move forward 2 steps. So it'll be a good resolution. But it is quite disheartening to watch this. You see? Then we have Iran, who's back and forth, right? It's back and forth. The same idea. And now we see in Eretz Yisrael, again, the fall of the Erev Rav, right? What does that mean? All of a sudden, there's an election in April, and Netanyahu fails to put together a government. That's a move forward, you see? But he tried. But the obstacle is that, wait a minute, he's going to start again. He fails again in September, you see? But nope, he is now indicted, you see? And then there's a guy called Gideon Sa'ar who's running against him, and all of a sudden Netanyahu wins, and not Sa'ar, which, by the way, is nowhere near as bad as it looks. People don't understand. The incredible thing about what Gideon Sa'ar did is that, first of all, people don't understand. Netanyahu did not become prime minister. He just employed his candidacy for prime minister, but he's not prime minister. He's got to run for elections in March. You see, that's the first thing they don't understand, and so on. Didn't make him prime minister. The second thing, which is really in many ways very interesting, okay, is that Saar got almost 30% of the vote. That should have been impossible. Netanyahu is a legend in Israel. It's amazing. You would have expected that a guy like Saar, right, would only get 1% of the Likud vote. Instead, he got 30. To me, that's a ness. You see, even though it wasn't enough, but 30%. But the most important thing forward for Saar is that he is now internationally known. Nobody ever heard of this guy a year ago, right? And now he's all over. Everybody in Israel knows about him, right? The Washington Post, the New York Times, they all have articles about him. You know, there's even an article that came out in England somewhere and said, watch Saar, because he's the next guy. He's known now. And that's basically what's the 2 steps forward. But there was a setback. Like the messianic process always has a setback, right? And Netanyahu won. But that didn't make him prime minister. And remember, he failed twice to put a coalition together. Not only that, he's indicted. And the polls, all the polls coming out show that the opposite party, Gantz, is winning over Netanyahu. So the amazing thing is that the Likud is endangering themselves altogether as being the party, you know, who has the coalition. They may have lost the election, you see, and they'll sit in the opposition, which is basically a cemetery. It's a political cemetery. That's what the opposition is. So how they can think that he's going to win, it's just amazing. It's very likely, and it could be, that Likud will lose the elections, you see. Now, assuming that even if he wins, he's got to put a coalition together, you see? And he already failed twice, and he's indicted. There's a lot of people that are now against him being prime minister, you know. So when you look at this, he has won by a long shot. What has happened is that there's a setback. But like I just showed you, there's always setbacks. The messianic process is filled with setbacks. That's the whole point, because of all the considerations which what I mentioned, right? That the Jews, you have to satisfy judgment, or the evil has to have its due. So you can't just redeem and destroy evil, you see. There is a proliferation of evil before. So when God does destroy them, he will have destroyed an incredible, powerful enemy, you see. But what has happened so far, it shouldn't be disheartening for somebody who realizes that the messianic process, right, is 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Always, in order to satisfy all these requirements. And like I said, it's very important to go slow so people will have credibility. You go too fast, everybody's going to get frightened and nobody's going to believe this. You see. So this in many ways is really what is happening. See. Now, something which I thought about is, why is this happening? And my feeling is that somebody has failed to do his job. Who is that? There's a law in Israel that if nobody has put together a coalition, okay, even after one time, then the president of Israel, who happens to be Rivlin, he is allowed to appoint a person without even asking anybody else, and say to that person, I am giving you the right to try to form a coalition. In fact, that law exists in case there's no coalition by any of the parties, you see. But he failed to do that after the first election. Then what did he do? He allowed a second election, you see. And the same thing, it failed. So what he should have done immediately is say, listen, Saar says he can put a coalition, right? You guys failed twice. I'm going to give it over to Saar. But for some incredible reason, he still didn't do it. All he did is force Israel to go to a third election. Now, lest you say, okay, it is a third election. Not only is the country sick of it, right? Do you know what the 3 elections cost? I will tell you. Okay, the governor of the Bank of Israel said that he estimates that all 3 elections cost 10 billion shekel. That's billion, not million. That's approximately $3.5 billion. Israel doesn't even have that money. They say they're going to have to raise tax on everybody. You see, so it is incredible to see where was Rivlin. You know, after once, okay, you made the mistake, but after 2 losses and now the guy's indicted, you know, and by the way, he got indicted, he had a 21, if I remember correctly, he had a 21-day period after both people failed in the second attempt, right, to give the nod to Saar. Instead, he didn't. He let it pass even though Netanyahu was indicted. To me, it sounds like it's an incredible failure of this man to exercise his authority in this particular situation. So all he's done, he's put the country through a third election. It's another $1.5 billion. It's astounding what this guy's doing, right? And this is the president of Israel, right? And the whole country is again divided. That's all on their mind. And not only that, since there's no government, right, they're surrounded by enemies, they cannot even pass a budget. For what? You see, to me that seems to be really the height of irresponsibility. It's terrible to say, but that's the height of irresponsibility. And the state of Israel has been without a government, will have been without a government for 1.5 years. You know, it's for a country to function without a government for 1.5 years, and that's assuming there's going to be a resolution in the third election. But what happens if there isn't? You see, what is it going to do? Go to a fourth election? Could cost another $1.5 billion. I think what's happening is to be a rebellion in Israel. They're going to tolerate this nonsense. What?
They kick Rivlin out.
I mean, it's just astounding to watch. Where are these people? They have the authority to bring about a resolution, and they don't. You know what it is to make people pay, and now they're going to raise the taxes? 10 billion shekel? For what? For this nonsense? When they've had the authority, and not only Rivlin, the Knesset could have assigned the guy. If 61 people would have backed Saar, right, he would immediately become the prime minister. They also have that authority. And the whole reason why the law happened is in case of this scenario. So they failed to do it once, they failed to do it twice, and now they're playing around with a third election. It wouldn't be incredible if again they failed to put a coalition together? That would be interesting.
It's plan to get rid of the government.
Yes, but
hand in hand with what the Rabbi is saying.
Exactly.
So the government.
Well, yeah. But what is interesting, it's like God is saying to them, you know, listen, you can have all the elections you want, but you're not going to have an Erev Rav government. It's over. But hopefully they're going to get the lesson learned, or else it's going to, you know, the fifth election, 7th and 8th election, you know, they're going to. To my mind, it is such stupidity, it's beyond belief. Because they could have solved it after first election, certainly after the second election. But how do you not do it when your prime minister is now indicted for 3 crimes? You know, it's unbelievable, and it's just, you know, to me it resembles a circus. It's just a bunch of clowns running the government. It's incredible. You know, especially in a time when there's so many enemies that face Israel, surrounded. They can't put a government, they can't put a budget together. Many laws they can't do because you need a permanent government. They're just suspended in the air. It's unbelievable.
Just clone Trump.
What?
In Israel. Clone Trump.
Yes, yeah. That's right. You need to clone Trump and put him in Israel. Exactly. Israel needs a Trump.
That's it.
Exactly, you know. But what I'm trying to bring out is that don't be dismayed. This is exactly how the redemption works. 2 forward and 1 back. So it should be very interesting to see what exactly happens. In any case, so this is the idea, which is a very important idea, that the Geula does not come in a smooth way, without any interruptions, without any obstacles. There's always obstacles. And I'm showing you that even in Egypt, and Moshe Rabbeinu was the Mashiach, And God said, "You're the man," by the burning bush. Even he came to Paroi, and Paroi said to him, "No." You see? Now imagine what he had to feel. In fact, what's interesting is the Or HaChaim said, the Or HaChaim says in Perek Daled in Shemos, that why the Rosh mentions that Paroi will say no, and then in the end he will refuse to let my firstborn, and I will tell that, and I will kill all the firstborn of Paroi. So the Or HaChaim says, why did he tell him the last Makkah now? He hadn't even gone to Egypt yet. It was at the burning bush. So the Or HaChaim says, because had God not told him that, then Moshe Rabbeinu would become disgusted with the whole shlichus, with the whole agency. He said, "What is this?" And in fact, even that didn't help, because he came running back to the bunch and said, "What's going on here?" But had he not told him the end scenario, don't worry, in the end, he's going to let you guys go, So the Or HaChaim says, because Moshe Rabbeinu would have got disgusted with the whole shlichus and says, "This doesn't make sense." The Or HaChaim says this. You see? That's what happens, because Moshe Rabbeinu is the Mashiach. So how could he be failing again and again and again? In any case, so this really is a very important idea, to understand this is a messianic process, and these things are happening in all three major centers. In America, which is the Rosh Be'esav, trying to unseat the Tov Shebe'esav, which makes sense. I've spoken that extensively. Then you have Iran, which is beginning to collapse, and they are the major terrorist state that sponsors everything. And then you have the Erev Rav. It's just fascinating to watch how all of them are happening simultaneously. And therefore, let's certainly hope that we're going to watch.
Don't leave out Europe.
What?
Don't leave out Europe.
In terms of?
Like France is like sort of slowly destroying itself also.
Although England, because Boris Johnson has some kind of a rejuvenation, sort of, but France is self-destructing. Yeah.
Iran said they were going to mourn the loss of the general for 3 days, and then after retaliate.
I want to tell you something. It'll never. If they try to retaliate. I pointed out, I heard that
15 seconds.
What America is doing now is killing the military of Iran that are stationed in Iraq. They're killing them. I just heard it tonight, It's astounding. So if they have any reason to be mad, they're probably going crazy. And they can't do anything because they realize Trump is not a guy you want to start up with. Trump is not anybody else. He's not Bush. He's not Clinton. He will kill you.
He's not Obama.
He's Obama. That's, to compare them is almost sacrilege.
The only thing they can is work with the Democrats.
What?
The only thing they can do is work with the Democrats.
Who, the Iranians?
The Democrats already put forth a bill that Trump is not allowed to do anything without permission from Congress, any acts of aggression. They want to pass a bill, but to tie his hands so that he can't act on his own.
Yeah, because how dare you not inform us? It's ludicrous. But it's really fascinating to watch. Like I say, I think Iran really has problems. They really do not know what to do. If they do anything that will take out American lives, Trump is going to retaliate massively. He's not going to it's not going to be tit for tat. He's going to wipe out major segments in Iran. That you can be sure of, And listen, we're not far. 2030 is not very far off. And things are accelerating at such a speed that you realize this whole thing ultimately really is going to come to an end. And if you think that's a miracle, the real miracle is not even that. The real miracle is what's called the rehabilitation of the Jews. That's the ness. When so many Jews, unfortunately, are gone, the real miracle is that, because like I said, the Rosh will not bring the Mashiach to a nation, his children that are so degraded. Most Jews are gone. Even though it's a daf yomi, and I forgot to mention one thing. which my wife told me to mention. I give her the credit that the siyum of the daf hashas, right, happened on Wednesday, and when did they kill Soleimani? Thursday. Who knows if the schus of so many Jews finishing hashas, where the Rabbi said, listen, I'm going to take out Iran myself. I'm not even going to have Israel involved at all, which is very good, because it spares them lives and ammunition and all that, but I will destroy them. And she's probably right. Who knows what the schus of the Daf Yomi is?
Well.
What?
Schus of Hanukkah as well.
Yes, but when you analyze the juxtaposition, Wednesday was a Daf Yomi, right? And Thursday got killed. It's got to be something there, because we don't know what the effect is of 100,000 Jews learning and finishing Shas. We do not know. What?
Today was the finish, really.
No, but the siyum, the celebration.
That's the pre-siyum.
I'm sure the Boshim says, I'm okay with that. I don't think he minds, But wait. But we don't know what the schos is, the merit of tens of thousands of Jews that have finished the Shas, even though they don't remember it, whatever, there's what to say, but the main idea is that they were moist nefesh. Imagine what it is to get, how does somebody have a commitment for one page a day for 7.5 years? And everybody's got a busy life. There's weddings, there's bar mitzvahs, there's you go out. It's astounding, and a blot is not easy to finish. You got to sit there and sweat, right? It's not easy to finish. And even if you use the Art Scroll Talmud, the Gemara, it's a lot of hard work, and so on and so forth. And to do this commitment for 7.5 years is a mesirus nefesh that I think places the Jewish people at an unbelievable height of merit. And I wouldn't be surprised if that merit will destroy Iran. It's like Haman said. I remember he said, what destroyed Haman? I think the korban, I forgot, it was the mincha, it was the keteris that the Jews offered in the Beis Hamikdash, that destroyed them. What was that?
The claimants of the Omer.
Was the claimants? It was the mincha. Yeah, it was the Omer, yeah. But, so we don't know what the value of these things really are, and so on. But it's, as you say, it's very probable that Wednesday was that merit, and it was recorded in heaven, and Thursday, we destroy Iran. Because this is the beginning of the end of Iran. They won't know, and they're going to make some stupid judgment to kill Americans, and Trump, that's all he needs. I remember what he once said, Rouhani, president of Iran, said, he came out with some statement against America. Yeah, if they don't do something, we're going to really do something bad against them. So I remember what Trump said. It was an incredible display of threat. Trump said, if you ever say this again, we will visit you with I think it was a fire and brimstone that the world has never seen before. Do you know what kind of threat that is?
Right.
For somebody to say that, and they could do it. We don't even know what in the arsenal of America. They've got pulse bombs and smart bombs, and that they got their cruise missiles. I'm not even talking about the atomic weapons, the hydrogen bombs. And today, it doesn't take much to destroy a country. Either cybersecurity can do it, hacking can do it. Remember the Stuxnet? That it was unbelievable what that did, But also you take out the infrastructure. You bomb the dams, you bomb the hydroelectric plants, and that's the end. You send the guys back to the cavemen. You see? It doesn't take much to destroy the country, and you don't have to kill the people. I think they have a neutron bomb that just kills people and not buildings. They've got all kinds of ways to do this, But, and Iran knows that. They realize who they're playing around with, So I'm sure there's what's called they're burning the midnight oil in Iran. What do we do to save face? So I really hope they do something stupid, and then Trump just takes them out, and finished with the whole parsha. Because the Messianic process demands, like I said, 3 things. One is security for Israel, or people will not move there. demands prosperity, where everybody can make a living, a great living there, so you won't resist moving there. And the third thing is Torah, religiosity. The Jews have to come back, and hopefully that will happen in very short order.
How do we get them to come back?
Yeah.
What is the motive from the side of the evil, so to speak, when their motive to the Jews that they're the righteous nation, and they're the nation of God, and
Yeah, well,
what they're doing was
See, what you're mentioning is,
their way.
yeah. But let me give you,
So what point of the Gula does that come?
well, first I have to understand that what's the requirement. When evil finally gives up, there are two things that have to happen. You find out by Yaakov Avinu when he fought the Malach, who's the Sultan. Evil has to admit that it was wrong and that good was right. And the second thing, it has to then disappear. It's not enough for evil to disappear, because then you could have said, well, maybe evil was right, except good was stronger than that. So you have to have what's called a hidor, the admission. That's exactly what the Malach did. He admitted to Yaakov that you defied, Lavan and Esav and all that, but Tuchal, and you were successful. So the Sultan had to admit that Yaakov Avinu was the right guy for the brachas. Then the Sultan said, okay, now release me and let me go back, and so on, So the question is, what does it mean that evil will admit to good, that the world will admit to the Jews and so on? That could be at the end of time, when the Mashiach comes, when when everybody will see the power of God, and they will say, we were wrong, and you were right, and the evil will just be gone. That's the end. That's the destruction of the Sultan.
Does it also come in stages? Because I think after the seventh Makkah, Paro admitted that, but he continued on his path.
That may come in stages, yeah. Well, in a certain sense it does, because there are many nations that were involved in the Holocaust, and they apologized. I mean, whatever that means. You don't apologize, by the way, to the living. That's the mistake they make. They killed this guy, so what are they doing, apologizing to that guy? But there's obviously no other option, and the truth is you can't apologize to dead. That's one of the things that you cannot apologize for. But at least at some level, they do apologize for what they did. So that's the beginning of something. The amazing thing about that, it's not stopping anti-Semitism from growing. But I think why is that happening? Because that's God is sending a message to the Americans. This is not your land. You need to come back to Israel, or you need to begin thinking of, going back to Eretz Israel. But the truth is, in order for that to happen, Israel, the state of Israel, has to have become user-friendly. You have to get rid of the bureaucracy, the regulations, the ridiculous, socialism aspect of Israel, and make it an incredible place that you could have, the cost of living has to come down. There's so many things that have to happen in Israel in order to make Israel a user-friendly country, in the sense that now people won't mind going to Israel. Many people go to Israel and they have to come back, which is because it's not a user-friendly nation. And in the Messianic era, it has to become very easy for a person to pick up and really have a great lifestyle, a spiritual lifestyle in Eretz Israel. But for that to happen, you need to get rid of Netanyahu, rid of all these people, and put somebody whose real mission is to bring Torah, spirituality, ruchnias, back to the Jewish people in Eretz Israel. And also, hopefully that will filter down to America. That's really what's happened. And that's why we're watching simultaneously, the fall of the Erev Rav, and like I say, and the rise of Esav, also known as Trump, who has now done tshuva and trying to assist the Jews.
Is that your
Anyway.
take on the recent upswing of anti-Semitic incidents?
Yeah, it's the Moshe saying to Klal Yisrael, this is not your country. The Jews have become so used to living in its great place and so on, But with these rise, although the anti-Semitism in many ways, even though it's on the rise, it is, no question. But you know where it's really on the rise, although it's been a fatal blow, is the college campuses. There is so much hatred of Judaism, of Jews, of Israelis, and there's hatred of religion in general, going on the college campuses. And the real threat is not so much the people on the campuses, that these are the people who are growing up and will be future American citizens. That means all of these people will be bred to hate Jews. It's terrible to watch, what the future can hold and so on, But ultimately, listen, the Rebbe says, and even if your exiles are at the ends of heaven, I will gather you and bring you to me. It's a shvur. The Rebbe says that at the end of Dvarim, So we know that no matter where you are, even if you're working on even if the Jew is working on Samoa, he's got a grocery store on Samoa Island, the Rebbe is going to come and get you.
I think there's a Jew right now in the space station.
Is there? Yeah.
I sent a picture of
Well, guess what? The Rebbe is going to get him to, literally. And that's why it says at the ends of heaven, because this guy's really in the heaven. Doesn't make a difference. Even if you're in a satellite, I'm going to come and get you, which is physically and so on, and I am going to bring you to me, which means that I will bring you back to Ruchnius. The Jews must be returned spiritually, not just physically. And that is going to be the greatest miracle of all. Why? Because that has to happen through Teva. Because the whole messianic process is happening through natural means. So how is the Rebbe going to bring back 11 million Jews that are gone, intermarried, unaffiliated, and assimilated? That we don't even know how, but that will happen, and I hope it'll happen shortly. So sit back and watch the game as all of this is happening. But it's just amazing to see how it's all coordinated,
Enjoy the ride.
Yeah, enjoy the ride. What was that?
we have our own work we have to do too.
Well, yeah, I mean, of course.
We have to sit back.
Yes, that's right. Okay, any other questions?
Is there a difference between now and Mitzrayim? In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu was already on the scene as Mashiach, and he had problems.
Yeah.
And you seem to indicate that this time around, all the problems will happen before Mashiach and Yosef comes, whereas he will have just complete success with one way or another. Is that true? Or once Mashiach comes, that's it? It's all over?
Well, no. See, that's the interesting thing about that. When Mashiach comes now, it's be'itoi. You see, when Moshe Rabbeinu, his idea, his geula was different than our geula. Even though obviously they're both redemptions, his geula was done on through schus, through yisurin, because the Jews can do the tikkun through mitzvahs, tshuva, and yisurin, commandments, repentance, and suffering. And the Jews had suffered sufficiently where they actually did the tikkun, even though they were at the 49th level of tumah. You see, but they brought the redemption through the concept of yisurin. You see, but that wasn't really be'itoi. Be'itoi in its time, achisheno, I will hasten it, in its time means that there is a deadline, that the redemption will come no matter what. And of course, God will make sure that everything that has to happen will happen, in terms of exiles, golus, and so on, But that already will happen, have obstacles, because that's the concept of chevli Mashiach. Remember I said that?
Right.
Birth pangs have the Messiah. What do you mean birth pangs? That's the chevli Mashiach. Those are the obstacles, the deterrents. But ultimately speaking, once the Mashiach, whatever, knows who he is and so on, then those deterrents will stop, and he will be only successful. He has to, because if he's not successful, there's no credibility. Like I said, that's how you know, the Rambam says, because everything he does must work. He never fails, which is astounding. So therefore it means, that's the case, there's no obstacles. See, and once that is designated, that is the aschalta de geula. That is the true beginning of redemption. You see, but right now, you have all kinds of difficulties and obstacles that are happening now. So there is a difference. Even though it says, Hine gualti eschem achas koreishis, it says that, behold, I will take you out, I will redeem you. The last redemption will be just like the first. The first redemption was, of course, Egypt. So the second redemption, which is now, will be like the first. So there are an enormous amount of similarities, you know. But like I say, you know, eventually there will be no obstacles and it will just run incredibly smooth. But there's a lot of stuff that has to happen, like I say. You know, Trump has to reign supreme without the Democrats. Why? Because he has to now really allow Israel and help them fulfill the tikkun. You need him there with full power. Iran has to be completely dissolved and all its proxies, and the Erev Rav has to be completely removed.
And what about the 80% of the Jews?
What about them?
The ones that didn't make it in Mitzrayim, they have to come back.
Well, they have come back with Gilgal.
Yes, I understand. Is the final Geula, are they going to be zilchet to it, or is there going to be another 80% that's not going to make it?
No, there'll be...
What's the paradigm? If you're making the paradigm of Mitzrayim, I need 80% would have to go, or is in the final Geula, somehow they're going to make it through?
They'll make it through because there's no free will. See, in Egypt there was free will.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
You know? Whereas in the Beitoi, when God says, I'm going to gather you, guess what? He's not asking you.
Right.
He's going to get you, no matter where you are. It's called absolute authority. There's no Bechira, so so of course not, you know? Okay. That's it. The ongoing saga. Let's hope by Purim something really happens, you know, and it really start, you know.